Imagine a man who made entire armies tremble. Ambassadors fell to their knees before him. Generals who had won dozens of battles refused to face him in the field. Even the great Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, one of the most powerful rulers of the 15th century, admitted that this man was unlike anyone he had ever fought. His name was Vlad III, ruler of Wallachia. Son of the dragon, known to history as Vlad the Impaler, he turned fear into a weapon and used it to defend a small country surrounded by enemies on every side. He was ruthless, brilliant, and deeply shaped by a childhood that broke most people who lived through it. But today we are not talking about battles. Today we are talking about the women in his life, the ones who loved him and paid a devastating price for it. The one who, against every law of war and politics, found a way into his heart. Three women, three stories, and one man the whole world remembers as a monster, but almost no one knows as a husband, a lover, or simply a man who was, beneath everything, still human. Let's begin. Before we talk about the women in Vlad's life, we need to understand the kind of man they were dealing with. Because Vlad was not simply a cruel medieval ruler, he was a person who was broken very early and who built something extraordinary and something terrible from those broken pieces. He was born around 1428 to 1431 in the town of Sighisoara, in what is now Romania. His father, Vlad II, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to defending Christianity against the Ottoman Empire. From his father came the name Dracul, meaning dragon, and from that came Dracula, son of the dragon. The name Impaler came later, earned through the method of punishment he became infamous for. But the wound that truly shaped him happened when Vlad was around 13 years old. His father, seeking peace with the Ottomans, sent his two sons, Vlad and his younger brother Radu, to the Ottoman court as hostages. It was a common diplomatic practice of the era, but that does not make it any less of a trauma for a young boy. He lived for years in a foreign court, surrounded by people who spoke a different language, followed a different faith, and held his life as collateral. His younger brother Radu adapted. He learned Turkish, converted to Islam, and eventually became a close companion of Mehmed II himself. Vlad did not adapt. He watched. He memorized. He waited. Those years in captivity explain a great deal. A person who is held as a prisoner during adolescence, who witnesses betrayal at the highest levels, who learns that loyalty is always conditional. That person grows up with a complicated relationship, with trust, with power, and with the people who come closest to them. This is the man the women in his life chose, or were given to. The name of Vlad's first wife has not survived in any historical record. Take a moment to sit with that. The ruler of Wallachia, a man who terrified the Ottoman Empire, a figure whose legend has lasted 6 centuries, and we do not know the name of the woman who shared his life, raised his child, and in the end chose death over captivity to protect her dignity. This is not simply a gap in the archives. It is a reflection of the era. Women of that time existed in the margins of chronicles. They were mentioned when it was politically useful or when their fate was too dramatic to ignore entirely. What we do know about her comes from fragments. She was almost certainly a Wallachian noblewoman, a marriage of political alliance, as was standard for rulers of the time. She likely married Vlad sometime in the early 1450s, after he consolidated his position on the Wallachian throne for the second time. She was young, as brides of that era almost always were. She gave him a son. Mehnea, later known as Mehnea the Bad, was her child. That he grew into a feared and harsh ruler himself says more about the world that shaped him than about the mother who bore him. And she died in a way that even the chroniclers could not stay silent about. The fall from the tower. The year is 1462. Vlad is at war with the Ottoman Empire. His famous night attack on Mehmed's camp, one of the boldest military operations of the entire century, had not delivered the decisive blow he needed. The Ottomans advanced deeper into Wallachia. Vlad retreated to the fortress of Poenari, a near-impregnable stronghold perched high above a gorge in the Carpathian Mountains. But someone among his own people betrayed him. A message, shot over the walls by arrow according to tradition, warned that the fortress would fall. The Ottomans knew the routes. There was no escape. It was Vlad's wife who found the message. No one recorded what she felt in that moment. Fear, resignation, grief, She understood clearly what capture would mean for her, not simply imprisonment, but a fate she found entirely unacceptable. She walked to one of the towers of the fortress, and she stepped off the edge, into the dark, into the river far below. The local people gave that river a name that has never changed. They called it Riul Doamne, the River of the Princess. It still carries that name today. She had no name in the chronicles, but the river remembers her. And now we come to the woman the chronicles do not mention, because women like her were never written down. They existed at the crossing point of wars, of captivity, and of human hearts that do not ask permission before they feel what they feel. We will call her Zara. Her precise name is unknown, as are the names of hundreds of women who found themselves taken during the endless conflicts between Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire. But her portrait is drawn from what was real, the reality of captives, of courts, of the quiet spaces where enemies sometimes became something entirely unexpected to one another. Who she was, Zara was the daughter of a minor Ottoman official, educated to the standards of her world, which were genuinely high. She knew Persian poetry, she understood astronomy, she could read and write at a time when most people could not. She carried herself with the particular dignity of someone who had been raised to understand that grace under pressure was its own form of strength. She came into Vlad's world somewhere between 1462 and 1464, during the years when he was held under a form of comfortable captivity in Hungary by King Matthias Corvinus. Captured during a border conflict and passed between different households, she eventually ended up among the servants of the Wallachian ruler's court in exile. The first meeting, Vlad was not accustomed to people who held his gaze. He was used to obedience, to lowered eyes, to the way that even powerful men shifted uncomfortably when he entered a room. Zara did not lower her eyes. Not out of defiance, she was not foolish enough for that, but she carried a quiet certainty that she was a prisoner, not a slave. She understood the difference, and she held on to it the way a person holds on to the one thing they have left. He did not punish her for it. He asked to speak with her. That alone was unusual. What grew between them, the Hungarian years roughly 1462 to 1474, were the only prolonged period in Vlad's adult life when he was not fighting, not ruling, not performing the role of the feared warlord. He had a household relative comfort and something he almost never had: time. Zara became something he had not expected, an equal in conversation. She told him about Constantinople, the city Mehmed had taken 9 years before. She described it with a complexity that surprised him, not as pure triumph, not as pure tragedy, but as something immense that had simply happened. The way great things happen, changing everything and explaining nothing. She recited poetry to him in Persian, a language he half understood from his years as a young captive at the Ottoman court. He did not ask her to stop in its own quiet way. That was a language too. And he in turn spoke to her about Wallachia, about the smell of pine forests in spring, about the mountains that looked like the edge of the world at dusk, about the fortress of Poenari standing over its gorge, where the wind sounds, on certain nights, like someone breathing. She listened, and she recognized in him something she had not expected, a person who, like her, had lost a home and could not return to it. They were on opposite sides of the same wound. What grew between them had no clean name. It was not a simple romance. It was something closer to recognition. Two people shaped by the same brutal era, from entirely opposite directions, finding in each other a strange and complicated rest from everything the world required of them. What he felt and what he could not allow, Vlad did not know how to be at ease with people. Years as a hostage, years fighting for a throne that kept slipping away, years of watching people he trusted make choices that cost him everything. All of that had closed something in him that most people keep open. But with Zara, something quietly shifted, perhaps because she was, in the eyes of the world, an enemy. She wanted nothing from him, not his throne, not his alliances, not his approval. She simply existed with her own interior life and her own quiet dignity. And in that presence, he could allow himself, briefly, to be a person rather than a ruler. Did he love her? Perhaps to the extent that this particular man was capable of it, quietly, without declarations, without gestures designed to be witnessed. He simply kept her near. He listened to her. He did not send her away when he could have. For Vlad, that was a great deal. The end of their story. When Vlad finally gained his freedom in 1474 and began preparing to reclaim the Wallachian throne, he needed to remarry, and he could not marry Zara, an Ottoman captive, as the wife of Wallachia's ruler. The Hungarian court would never accept it. The Wallachian nobility would revolt, the church would object loudly and persistently. Zara understood this. She had probably understood it for years. She left without drama, without bitterness, or at least no record of either survives. Perhaps he helped her find a way back to her own people. Perhaps she simply disappeared into the movement of travelers along the roads of Hungary, back toward a world that had changed entirely since she had left it. But she left something behind, something invisible in the chronicles, but present in the quiet way he carried himself afterward. Slightly less sealed off, slightly more willing to sit in silence without filling it with authority. Or perhaps that is simply what we would like to believe about him. When Vlad emerged from his years in Hungary and began the careful work of reclaiming his throne, King Matthias Corvinus had conditions. One of them was a marriage. Her name was Ilona, sometimes recorded as Justina or Katharina, in different sources reflecting how loosely women's names were tracked by the record keepers of the era. She was a relative of the Hungarian royal house, a young noblewoman raised at one of the most sophisticated courts in Central Europe at the time, and she was given to Vlad as part of a political arrangement that suited everyone except, perhaps, the two people most directly involved. Neither of them chose the other, but something happened between them all the same, something that does not fit neatly into the cold logic of diplomatic unions. Who she was, Ilona grew up in a world where noble women were educated seriously. She knew Latin, she understood music, she could hold a conversation on theology, philosophy, and history, accomplishments that for a woman of the 15th century represented genuine intellectual cultivation rather than decoration. She had been raised to manage a household and a husband with equal grace, which is not as small a skill as it might sound. The households of medieval rulers were complicated, politically charged environments, and the woman at the center of one needed intelligence, patience, and a very precise sense of when to speak and when to wait. She was not fragile. She was quiet in the way that strong things are quiet, not because there is nothing inside, but because there is simply no need to announce it. What grew between them? Vlad returned to the Wallachian throne in 1476. Ilona went with him, from the elegance of the Hungarian court into a mountain country where every village carried the memory of conflict and every nobleman watched the new ruler with carefully concealed calculation. She did not complain, or if she did, no one wrote it down. He noticed her differently than he noticed most people. She did not flatter him. She did not disappear quietly into the background. She spoke her mind, carefully, and at the right moment, and he respected that more than almost anything else a person could offer him. She gave him children, 2 sons, possibly 3. The records are incomplete, as they so often are for the women closest to powerful and dangerous men. But the fact itself remains. She gave him continuation. She gave him the possibility of a future that extended beyond his own life. And she stayed beside him even when staying beside Vlad meant living under constant uncertainty. The final months, Vlad died at the end of 1476 or the beginning of 1477. The exact circumstances remain a matter of historical debate, whether in battle against the Ottomans or through betrayal by people on his own side. His head was sent to Constantinople. Ilona was left a widow in a country that was not fully hers, with young children and no throne to stand behind her. What became of her is not recorded. She disappears from the pages of history as quietly as she had lived in them. No dramatic final scene, no recorded words of grief, no monument built in her name. Perhaps she returned to Hungary. Perhaps she remained in Wallachia under the protection of her sons. Perhaps she simply continued the way that genuinely strong people continue, one quiet day at a time, long after the story the world cared about had already moved on without her. It would be dishonest to tell this story without acknowledging its darker dimensions. Vlad had a very specific view of women, of honor, and of moral conduct, a view that was not unusual for the 15th century, but which, in him, was taken to extremes that even his contemporaries sometimes found disturbing. Medieval sources, including a Russian account known as the Tale of Dracula, described Vlad ordering severe punishments for women he accused of behavior he considered dishonorable. To him, a woman's faithfulness was a matter not of her own dignity, but of the honor of the household, the family, the name. A violation of that was, in his understanding, equivalent to betrayal on the battlefield, and he treated it accordingly. These accounts may be exaggerated. Chronicles of the era were frequently written by political enemies, and exaggeration served their purposes well. But even if only part of what was recorded reflects reality, we are looking at a man whose understanding of women was shaped entirely by concepts of possession and control. The contradiction at the heart of his character is worth naming honestly. The same man who could spend hours in genuine conversation with a captive woman, who respected Ilona's quiet intelligence, who listened when most rulers simply commanded, also believed, with complete sincerity, that women existed within a rigid set of rules and that breaking those rules had serious consequences. He was not a villain in the theatrical sense. He was a product of his era, his particular childhood, and the absolute power he eventually held. Understanding that does not excuse anything, but it does make him recognizably human, which is in some ways more unsettling than the alternative. Bram Stoker published Dracula in 1897, and ever since, the image of a mysterious nobleman who mesmerizes women with dark charm and promises of eternity has been inseparable from the name of Vlad Tepes. The real Vlad was not that. He was not a figure who stepped out of shadows with graceful seduction. He was a man with an intense, unsettling stillness, a man who had survived captivity, the loss of his father, the betrayal of brothers, and the theft of his throne more than once. He did not charm people. He compelled them through presence and will and a quality of absolute concentration that most people in his company found quietly overwhelming. The women in his life were not the victims of a romantic story. They were women caught in the extraordinary circumstances of a violent and unstable century, and each of them, in her own way, showed more courage than the history around them has ever acknowledged. His first wife chose death over surrender and gave a river its name in doing so. Zara chose to leave with dignity when the time came, carrying nothing with her but whatever she had always carried inside. Ilona chose to follow a difficult man into a difficult country and remained there until the very end. All three of them were strong in different ways, under different pressures, at different moments in one man's turbulent life, and none of them are remembered the way they deserve to be. Vlad III died in late 1476 or early 1477. His head was taken to Constantinople as evidence of victory. His body, according to legend, was buried in the monastery of Snagov, on a small island in the middle of a lake, in complete solitude. The women who were part of his story either outlived him or disappeared alongside the world he had built. One left her name to a river. One left a silence between the lines of history that speaks, if you listen carefully, more clearly than many words. One walked quietly out of the record the way strong people often do, without announcement, without ceremony. We remember Dracula. We remember the warlord, the legend, the figure who became a myth and then a story told across centuries. We remember the man who frightened an empire, but we have almost entirely forgotten the ones who actually knew him. And perhaps, when you look at it honestly, they were the bravest people in the entire story.